Sup, Rostradamus? I'm Leon, the e-reading maniac, coming at you with another video discussing some newer horror books I've been reading of late. We got 3 more books today, all of which I read on my Kindle, but which are all available also in paperback editions for you purists out there, and all of which are easily accessible if you go with the digital versions, and cheap, I may add, and can be accessed, procured from the comfort and safety of your own home with the click of a button. And you are going to want to check these 3 books out, dude. We got 3 bangers on the docket today. So without further ado, let's get to it. The first book we're talking about today is Within the Woods by Tony Urban. Now, this book was published independently, self-published book, in 2018. I'll begin by reading the synopsis. Don't go in the woods. For 12-year-old Garrett and his 4 best friends, the idyllic summer of 1989 crashes to a halt when Garrett's older brother vanishes. Something is very wrong in Sallow Creek, Pennsylvania. Something is turning their neighbors, their relatives, into unstoppable monstrosities. Monsters that are coming for them. Their small town is under siege, but the adults refuse to believe the truth. Can 5 young misfits and outcasts save the day? So, first of all, shout out to homie Chris for getting me hip to this book. I certainly would not have thought to check it out without his recommendation. I just, not very impressed with the title of this book. Pretty trite, and I feel like the cover art is a little lackluster. So don't let that deter you. I don't know. I feel like this book would have really benefited from some more classically kind of painted cover, especially considering that it's sort of like a throwback to late 80s Amblin-style adventure horror. But I know it's not cheap to hire, commercial artists and stuff. But in this case, I feel like I might have made a little bit more of a splash with a more striking and less generic title and cover. But anyway, this book, simply put, is about a quintet of 12-year-old boys in the summer of 1989, the great summer of 89, who suspect that the people in their town are transforming into grotesque, tentacle-limbed aliens, and they resolve to put a stop to it. Now, as I've mentioned time and again on this channel, kids versus supernatural horror is totally my jam. It's one of my absolute favorite tropes in horror, and in this case, I am happy to report that Tony Urban did it exceedingly well. I found this to be a fantastically gripping read from beginning to end. Like the best supernatural coming-of-age horror, you could take out all of the horror stuff and still have a perfectly compelling novel. In fact, I found myself reading this thing to be enjoying the non-horror aspects of it just as much, if not more, than the horror elements. It really rang true. You can tell that Tony Urban himself lived through this stuff. I'm sure he pulled a lot from his own childhood, and it's just got some really delightful scenes, just like scenes of like these kids shooting the shit at their local pizzeria, or jousting on their bicycles with broomsticks. It's so cool. And as a 37-year-old adult, it allowed me to sort of vicariously experience the joys of sort of that age again. And I thought it was I thought it was really well done. The characters I thought were fully realized and well wrought. The dialogue was fantastic, especially amongst these kids. It really rang true. This is the way kids talked back then. It wasn't politically correct, so don't go trying to look at this through 2020 goggles. Okay, this is the way they talked. And even for me, I mean, I'm a few years younger than these kids at that point, but even in the early 90s, kids talked like that. So definitely, I can attest to that. It was funny as hell at times. I was laughing my ass off just reading some of these dialogue exchanges. And yeah, really also sets the scene well. And for a period piece, I also thought it was done well. It didn't like shove your face in the fact that it took place in 1989. There's nothing I hate more than movies or books that are so try hard and are constantly reminding you, oh yeah, this is an 80s book or this is an 80s movie, right? No, in this one, we get just the right amount of subtle period references, that make it believable, but aren't too try hard. So yeah, and then when we do get the horror, when the horror does come, we get some just really awesome horror set pieces. We get some like just cool stuff. We get exploding heads. We get, boneless, mushy bodies, gelatinous skin. We get animate flesh, flesh that stretches like taffy. We get wormy tentacle fingers that will burrow into your face and more. And we get some nice gross out scenes as well, including one scene toward the end involving a kid swimming in liquid poop that almost made me gag. And the finale I thought was really cool. The finale takes place in this middle school gym and is a clear homage to Brian Yuzna's great 80s flick Society, in particular the shunting scene. And so any book that's going to reference the shunting scene in Society definitely gets props from me. It's very, very well done. But yeah, I had a blast with this. I think, if you enjoy 80s coming-of-age horror, if you like movies like The Gate or The Monster Squad, if you like cool monster flicks like Slither or Night of the Creeps or The Faculty, if you thought that season 3 was the best season of Stranger Things, then this is the book for you. And I do hope that Tony Urban writes a sequel to this book at some point. I would love to sort of catch up with these characters, maybe, picking up in the summer of 91 or the Halloween of 91. I do like my early 90s horror because I just really liked these characters and would love to see, for the ones who make it out of this one, what they're up to next. So yeah, this book definitely gets my high recommendation. Check it out. Check it out. All right. Book number 2, we are talking about All You Can Eat by Shane McKenzie. This book was published by Deadeye Press, one of my favorite independent horror publishers, in 2012. I will go ahead and read the synopsis for that one. Deep in Texas, there is a Chinese restaurant that harbors a secret. Its food is delicious, and the secret ingredient ensures that once you have one bite, you'll never be able to stop. But when the food runs out and the customers turn to cannibalism, the kitchen staff must take up arms against these obese people eaters, or else be next on the menu. All right, so this book is a novella. And, the author Brian Keene often says that novellas are the ideal format for horror. They're the ideal length. And I'm inclined to agree with him. And this book, All You Can Eat, is a good case in point. This thing fucking moves so fast. You could easily read this in one sitting. I didn't, just because I'm weird and can't, I guess, sit still for that long. I did read it in a day. It just whizzed by. Loved every single page of it. I love Shane McKenzie. I think that, for my money, he's one of the more interesting horror writers of like the young crop. He's been publishing, I guess, since around like 2012. Sadly, he hasn't put out anything like lately. I think he's been doing like screenwriting, but he just has such an outrageous, absurd imagination, and he just comes up with like the most ludicrous books. He's got a couple of really cool short story collections, and one book I do want to mention. He wrote a book called Pus Junkies that is probably my favorite coming of age gross out horror novel of all time. I mean, this thing is just disgusting, beyond the pale. Apparently, Lloyd Kaufman of Troma Entertainment at one point was developing a screen adaptation of it, and I could totally see that coming from Troma. But yeah, I love Mackenzie's writing style. I think it's very vivid and visual. It's just the right amount of description without going overboard. It really propels the plots along, and they, they do read like movies, but I say that in the best possible way. Yeah, and for this one, amid all of the kind of gross, crazy, cannibalistic carnage, we also get some surprisingly thoughtful depictions of, well, in this case, kind of like immigration, illegal immigration, because the protagonist of this book is a Mexican dude who smuggles himself into the States to find opportunities, and he's waiting to like reconnect with his family back home. And I thought that was actually really well done, thoughtfully done. And I really liked this protagonist, this guy, this Mexican dude who, is desperate for work and gets hired at this all-you-can-eat Chinese buffet called Paradise Buffet, where all of this mayhem ensues. Yeah, I thought it was pretty good. In addition to him, we also get this sort of damaged, alcoholic female cop who suffers from, I wrote this down, cacomorphobia. I had to look that up. That would be a fear of fat people. And she is haunted by memories of her disgusting, obese, perverted father. And it's really like messed her up. So of course, in typical Mackenzie fashion, of course she is the cop called to this all-you-can-eat buffet where she is confronted with just these hordes of disgusting, obese, in other words, zombies, basically, who are like eating each other. And she's just like basically seeing like her dad in all of their faces. Like she just has all these traumatic flashbacks to like her childhood with her disgusting dad, like making her feed her and doing like gross things to her. And so, so it's very dark, but at the same time, it's also humorous. And that's something that Mackenzie does exceedingly well. He balances the humor, the gross, the dark, and just the fucking chaotic really, really well. And his descriptions of the carnage at this buffet where these people are just going apeshit, just eating. We've just got some really finely detailed rendered scenes with these people, these fat pigs, just like with their pendulous stomachs and their grease-stained, blubbering lips, and it's just delightful. I love it. It's got a great sick sense of humor, and I think if you've never read Shane McKenzie, this would be a great place to start. He's written a lot of novellas. I think this one would be a good. This is one of his very first. I think in the intro, he says that it was his first sale, like the first book he actually sold. So yeah, check it out. It's fair. The ebook is pretty cheap, and it's a quick, fun, fast read. So that is all you can eat. All right, and then our third and final book that we are talking about today is Killer Lake by David Benton and W.D. Gagliani. And this book was also published by Deadeye Press. This one came out in 2019, pretty recently. I'll go ahead and read the synopsis for that one. Recipe for a Satanic Panic. Take a medium-sized cult and their best demonic summoning. Mix with a dash of strange psychic powers. Generously add murderous reanimated corpses, inbred cannibal rednecks, sex-starved half-naked co-eds, horny football players, and a surprise creature or two. Sprinkle in a fancy log cabin mansion, a labyrinthine set of tunnels, and a secret ritual tunnel. Stir. Bake on high at 666 degrees. You know it's going to be one killer party. Yeah, it is rare, I think, that a synopsis does a book justice, but my God, do I even need to go on? I mean, now, right off the bat here, we get some good old early 90s Ed Lee vibes with this ritualistic sacrifice with this like satanic coven in this like sacrificial chamber. It was awesome. It reminded me of novels like Creakers and Coven, a couple of my favorite early Ed Lee novels. And I will just say right off the bat, if you're a fan of Edward Lee's and Richard Lehman's, then you may really dig this book. This one, even though it is set in contemporary times, aside from a couple of flashbacks, all of the good old 80s tropes are there. We get the ditzy, slutty college chicks. We get hunky football players. We get, the camping trip. We get the big log cabin on the lake. We get the crusty old man at the gas station when they're heading up to the lake, warning them, to be careful. We get cheesy lines like, "I'm not a slut, I'm a sex machine." And all of these tropes, I mean, for me, it's just like a warm blanket. It feels so good. And rather than this novel being just your basic, boring slasher novel, no, we also get, as I said, satanic cult orgies. We get axe-wielding mud creatures. We get reanimated dead teenagers decapitating jocks and playing baseball with their heads. We get zombie meatheads chewing on brains. It's like Stuart Gordon took over a slasher movie a third of the way through and just decided to throw in the kitchen sink. It's just wonderful. Not to mention, then at the end, we get a coda that goes full tilt cannibalistic redneck horror and really reminds me of something like Mr. Torso by Edward Lee, that amazing short story, and with a dash of Richard Lehman's The Cellar for good measure. And speaking of Edward Lee and Richard Lehman, we get some awesome scenes of carnage, obviously, right? Benton and Gagliani do not stint on the bloodshed, much to this reader's delight. This being an ostensible slasher, of course, we do also get our obligatory explicit sex scenes, but they're actually done fairly well. They're actually done much better than most sex scenes in most horror novels. But yeah, this book is just, it felt like something that you would come across on the shelf of your local mom and pop video store in 1989. This thing is equal parts The Forest, The Mutilator, The Hills Have Eyes, Hack-O-Lantern, Reanimator. If I'm speaking your language, you know what I'm talking about. And even though it takes a good third of the book for the mayhem to really start kicking, that's okay because these guys are good writers. And even like the other book, the non-horror stuff is engaging because the characters are so fun. Even though they are these kind of standard tropes, ultimately, the dialogue is so well done that you like hanging around these people. It's just fun. It's fun to hang out with them. So you don't mind, it taking a little bit of time. Not to say that this is a slow novel at all. But the dialogue in this is, I thought was really witty and humorous. And some of the dialogue just had me rolling. Like it was just flat out, just laugh out loud, funny. And, even though I think it would be accurate to characterize this in some ways as a horror comedy, it does also get pretty scary, especially at the end. That coda I was talking about, when it kind of tilts into redneck horror, there were some pretty scary parts to that. And I was actually, but at the same time also being funny too. So again, these guys are, it's not easy to do, to balance between the humor and the horror. But I thought these two did that really well. Now, of course, this is ultimately like a cheesy horror novel. So, sometimes you're going to get characters making some questionable choices. Not everything is going to always, make a whole lot of sense. But, I mean, come on. I'm not here to fucking nitpick, right? Yeah, I thought this was great. You probably won't guess who the final girl is. I do like that Benton and Gagliani did adhere to the quote-unquote rules of Final Girls in this thing, until they break that rule at the end. But Yeah, this book was like a beacon of light. I just had such a blast reading this over like a few days. I've been working at home, and this was like the thing I had to look forward to while I was like just like stressing over emails and work bullshit. I just like could not wait till like 3 o'clock when I could just crash on my couch, pour myself an iced tea, and just like dive into this fun, awesome book that just really represents everything that I love in horror. So yeah, total escape. I highly, highly recommend this book. So there you guys have it. Those are my three book recommendations. Three books that, frankly, I not only liked, but I pretty much loved all three of these, and I really am endorsing them. And these, and I'm happy to say that these books, unlike a lot of the vintage horror I review, which I know is not always so accessible, these are immediately accessible. You can order the paperback, or you can immediately get the ebooks. And one cool thing about ebooks is like the mass market paperbacks back in the day, these are cheap. They're always under $5. So that's really cool. So I do recommend them, bearing in mind, of course, my taste. So if you share my tastes and are into the shit that I'm into, I think that you will like these books. And reading these books really, it kind of gets me excited about contemporary horror. And and it gets me excited to continue to periodically catch up on the myriad horror titles that have amassed on my Kindle, and continue to do these videos, hopefully, here and there, to discuss the ones I like. And I'll probably only talk about the ones I like. I'm not here to like shit on a person's book, but also these are working writers. These are active writers here too. So I'm happy to be able to kind of spread the word and share the wealth, right? Because I love doing it with the vintage horror, obviously, and that will continue. But the mission statement of this channel has always been to spread the word on the forgotten horror titles, the neglected horror titles, the underappreciated horror titles, and there's tons of that with the vintage horror, but there's a lot of that, frankly, with new horror too. There's such a glut these days, actually, of new horror. There's a lot of crap out there that you have to wade through, but I'm happy if I can find those diamonds in the rough, and spread the word to you guys, so you guys can know like who are the new contemporary working writers who maybe their books are being unjustly neglected, and if I can help people like find those books, then that would be awesome. So I'm happy to do it, and I'm happy to continue doing it. So that's it, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. For those of you, by the way, who just watched what I said with a frown on your face, thinking, fuck that, I don't care about this, I want more vintage horror, just relax. Vintage horror is coming back. It actually started just yesterday. I dove back into a nasty little work from the early 90s that's a lot of fun so far. So I'll be looking out for a review of that and more vintage horror down the road. And as always, guys, thanks for watching the video. Be safe, stay healthy. I'll see you next time. Peace.